Hey everybody, today I want to talk about the Zoom L-20R, this digital rack mixer that's sitting behind me right here. This is a mixer that I bought a couple years ago, and I have a lot of thoughts on this, and what I find is actually there's not a ton of reviews or not a ton of talks about mixers in general on the internet. It just seems like, or sorry, not on the internet, but on YouTube. So I thought I'd just kind of share my thoughts and kind of help people decide if it's kind of right for them. Let's start with what the L-20R mixer is. So the L-20R mixer is a digital mixer, so it's intended for musicians, or you could use it for any kind of stage performance or conference or anything like that. Basically, if you don't know what a digital mixer is, it's kind of like an analog mixer, so something where you plug in a bunch of microphones or instruments or whatever you want, and it mixes them into usually what is a stereo output. So it's kind of blasted on two speakers. If you're watching this video, you probably know what a mixer is. And for sure, you probably know what an analog mixer is. You're probably used to seeing mixers where you plug in a bunch of, microphones, and then you have a lot of dials for, high, medium, low, maybe some compression, these kinds of things. And then you have faders at the bottom to mix your audio signals, right? Well, a couple of years ago, probably a lot longer ago than I discovered it, a lot of these mixers started going digital. And the advantage of digital, there are a couple of reasons that digital is advantageous. But one of the things is basically the flexibility of what you can do with the mixer, right? With analog mixers, you basically have a signal that's running through, a physical chain. And, you can't necessarily, or not at least easily or cheaply, reroute that audio or, have an... more, lots of effects, stuff like that. You're kind of at the mercy of the physical build of it. When it comes to digital mixers, though, you have that advantage that you can do a lot of flexibility with the sound that you're dealing with. And then the other kind of thing that comes with digital mixers, not that all of them have this, but you kind of get the flexibility of what the physical controls do, right? So as you can see with the L-20R, you don't actually see a lot of physical controls. You only see, a couple physical controls, and actually everything else can be controlled by something else. And in fact, for the L-20R, what you end up with is you can control it with an iPad app, right? So you can kind of play with the faders and you can play with the EQ and all this stuff through an iPad app that controls the digital mixer. So one of the big advantages to that is you have a flexibility in terms of the interface to control it. Which we'll get into a little bit later. But then you also have the advantage of size, right? Like you can take off physical control. So, a lot of digital mixers, sometimes you'll be able to control maybe 50 or 100 channels of audio, but they only have maybe 10 faders. Well, that's because you can switch what those 10 faders are doing. They can control, channels 1 through 10, and then you hit another button, and then they control channels 11 through 20 and so on, right? So digital mixers are pretty interesting this way. And as somebody who hasn't been really into pro audio, and I wouldn't consider myself by any means like an expert on pro audio. It was something that definitely piqued my interest because the possibilities of what you could do with a mixer, again, became very intriguing, which we'll get into in a bit. So that's what digital mixers are. And what a digital rack mixer is kind of like that latter half where you're removing a lot of the physical controls, because something like the L-20R is meant to be put into a rack, and then, you control it with your iPad or whatever. You don't have, the big mixing board or whatever, right? So that's what a digital rack mixer are. And L-20R by no means is the only digital rack mixer out there. There's one by Behringer called the XR18, the XR12, and something else. There's one from PreSonus, I believe. There's one from... can't remember off the top of my head. But the interesting thing is that there's not actually a massive amount of them. Like I honestly want to say, like when I go to like Sweetwater or any of these online stores, you don't see a ton of rack digital mixers, to be honest. It's not like you have a massive selection, at least in the kind of prosumer, maybe even consumer market. You don't have a ton of them. But anyways, the L-20R is one of those, and that's what a digital rack mixer is. So let's talk about the L-20R specifically. So the L-20R is a 20-track mixer. So what you get is 16 XLR quarter-inch channels. So again, plug in your microphones. You can even plug in guitars into some of the inputs. So you get 16 of the XLR quarter-inch combo jacks. And then 7 to 18 is a stereo line input signal, I believe through either quarter inch or RCA, and same thing with channels 19 and 20. So again, if you're talking traditional instruments and things that you're plugging in on stage a lot, those kinds of things, again, you want 16 channels, and then you got 4 more channels on top of that. 2 of those channels, like I said, are high Z, so you can plug in guitars directly. So like an acoustic electric guitar, you could plug in directly to it. Even an electric guitar, you could plug into one of the first 2 inputs. They all can be phantom power. I think they all have, I want to say 60 dB of gain, but I could be wrong about that. You might want to double check that. So they all have that. The 16 channels that you can plug in, they all have obviously gain control, and they also have a single knob compressor, which I'll talk about in a second. So there's this knob right here, which controls compression. They also have some padding. If you have a line signal that's too hot and you want to pad it down, you can add some padding there. And then every channel actually has, if you go into the app, again, a lot of stuff that you control that you would expect in a mixer. So one of the first things you can do is you can control the EQ. So it's a 3-band mid-parametric sweep EQ. If you don't know what that means, basically you have low, medium, and high to control. But you can also control what frequencies that mid affects. So you have low, medium, high. You also have some extra controls on there. You have a low cut filter. So if you want to kind of like get rid of some rumble or some low kind of humming on certain instruments and stuff like that, or even vocals, you can do that. So you have that, and so that's your EQ. You can also apply some effects to this. Now there are only 2 effects buses on this, so which basically means, so the way that these effects work, if you're again not used to mixers, is you can basically apply one effect to effects 1 bus, and you can apply a second effect to the second effect bus, but that's for the entire mixer. All right, so the entire mixer, every channel can basically only have 2 simultaneous effects. And so let's say you pick reverb for effects 1 and, I don't know, delay for effects 2. It's not like you can set that per channel. It's for the entire mixer. And then what you can do is each channel, you can basically dial in how much of that effect you want for each effect. So for me, most of the time it's things like reverb that I'm adding into that. So a couple effects there. So in effects 1, there's about, what do we got here? 10 effects, ranging from, certain reverbs, like a Hall 1 reverb, Hall 2 reverb, to, vocal effects. I don't even know really what that is. And then on effects 2, you have 10 other effects, different reverbs, some chorus, some delay, things like that you can apply to the second channel. So you have, like I said, EQ, you have effects, and then that's pretty much it per channel. And then obviously after that, you can kind of mix the actual mix, right? The faders and stuff like that. You can do general mixing things like soloing tracks. You can listen to the pre-fader level versus the post-fader level. So if you're setting gain, that helps, things like that. You can mute certain tracks if you want. And then there's this one strip above called record play, which I'll get into a little bit later. So you get those tracks, you get your compressor, you get your EQ, you get your effects. Like I said, a couple of high Z inputs as well. And then one of the very interesting things about this, which is one of the things that I got most excited about, which doesn't really make sense as a person who generally performs by myself. I actually don't have a band. I'm not really generally performing with a band. But for some reason, the idea of this got me really excited. But the L-20R, like a lot of digital mixers, have a lot of independent monitor mixes, basically. So generally, when you have a mixer, you're mixing all your channels for the audience, right? So you want the guitar to sound a certain way, you want the vocals to sound a certain way, and you mix it for the audience. And then what you can do with, lower grade mixers is you can send some of that directly to the performers, right? So you have a monitor pointing to the singer or to the guitarist or drummer or whatever, and you might be limited about how much you can control that mix separate from the audience mix, right? Well, with digital mixers, they seem to always have a lot of these. So on Zoom L-20R, you have actually 6 independent monitor mixes, which basically what that means is you can adjust the levels of, again, the relative levels of guitar, drums, vocals, all this stuff per mix, that wouldn't affect the main mix that's going in the audience, and would only affect the one mix for, say, the vocalist, one mix for the drummer, one mix for your bass player, and so on, right? And what's great about that is, like, let's say I know, for example, when I used to play in bands, when I used to play guitar, if I couldn't hear my guitar during my solos, it'd be really hard. Well, with that one mix, I can turn up my guitar only, right? And then that would be really, really good, right? So you have 6 independent mixes. And this is one of the things I'm talking about. That's one of the big advantages of digital mixers. It actually becomes really simple to make an interface like that on a digital mixer, like an iPad, right? So the way it works on the Zoom L-20R is you have these different mixes. You have the main mix and then the 6 monitor mixes, right? So I can say mix, my vocal really high, my guitar really high, but let's say I want the drums a little bit lower, right? I can do something like that. Now, if I tap on A for the monitor A mix, you'll see the faders reset. Well, I don't know if you can see that, but they did. And what I can do is I can adjust that different, right? And so when I flip between the main mix and the A mix, they're saved independently. Now, this is resetting because I'm not actually connected to the device, but when you're connected to the device, it actually saves them, saves the spots. And so what's really easy is that you can really easy see all your different mixes, right? So let's say your bass player is like, oh, can you turn up the drums a bit in my monitor? You can go to the bass player's mix and then kind of adjust it accordingly. So that's one of the really cool features of digital mixers, where again you have that flexibility. I know that exists in analog mixers. It's just analog mixers, sometimes they have an aux 1 or an aux 2 at most, but this is like 6 independent ones. I'm sure high-end analog mixers have this, but it's a really, really cool feature. And again, it's so easy when you have a digital interface to kind of deal with that stuff. So 6 independent mixes, and the way they hook up is actually at the very back. So on the back, you hook up your main speakers, but you can also hook up 6 monitors. And you can either hook up monitors or headphones, actually. So if you want to feed headphones into this thing rather than monitors, you can do that. And there's a switch to kind of control what you're doing there. So those are 6 independent mixes. And so that's what generally the live part of this mixer does, right? You have your 20 channels, 6 monitor mixes, 1 main mix, EQ, effects, all that stuff like that. But this thing actually has a couple of other things built into it that are pretty nice, that separate it from, maybe your traditional mixer. One of the things is that this is a USB interface. So you can plug this into a computer and you can basically directly record a microphone, or any 20 of these microphones, or sorry, 16, I guess, plus the other channels. You can directly record that into your computer. So that's really nice. Not to mention, like, again, the preamps in this thing are, I would say, pretty good. I'm not, again, a great audiophile, and I haven't been working in pro audio, but to me, they sound pretty good, to be honest. So you can plug it into your computer and record it as record stuff through it to do a USB interface. So that's really nice. And then secondly, kind of one of the unique features of this mixer is it actually has a built-in recorder. So right here, there's an SD card slot. You can put an SD card in there, and you can actually record all your tracks independently, actually. So that's kind of what this strip at the top here is. You can kind of tap on any of these. Again, it looks better when you're hooked up, but you can tap on any one of these, and if you hit record or play, you basically get the ability to record the tracks that you want to record. And what's pretty cool about this is you can record all those tracks, and it will record, again, the kind of like the dry track, basically, like without effects and anything like that. All the raw recordings, and you can do a lot with that. You could bring that into your DAW, and you can edit it and make it sound really good. Or what I use it for, which I found out to be one of the most handy features of this, is it works as a virtual sound check. So if you don't know what a virtual sound check is, it's basically like you record like the band or whoever. Maybe like for me, it's just myself. I just record myself, and then you can play it back. And when you're playing it back, you can mix everything as you're playing it back. So it's almost like you're having the band play for you, and then you can kind of mix afterwards. And this is really handy as a solo performer, right? Because I'm mixing myself. So I record myself first, and then I mix as I'm listening back to it. So really, really handy features, that built-in recorder. So 20 channel live mixer, built-in recorder, USB audio interface, Zoom L-20R, looking pretty good, sounding pretty good, right? When I started looking at digital mixers, I browsed it, I browsed what was out there, and for some reason I started leaning towards Zoom, because at the time I liked Zoom, right? I bought previous Zoom products, and I kind of liked what Zoom was all about. Now, I will say that you'll find out at the end of this review that my opinion of Zoom actually has changed a little bit. And at the end of this review, I'm going to tell you why I have a big problem with this mixer, to be honest. So, anyways, more on that later. But at the time, I liked Zoom as a company. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was kind of a company that is not really known maybe in the pro audio space. I mean, they're known, but they're not necessarily like known for that, right? Like they're known for a lot of their prosumer filmmaking gear. Recently, their podcast stuff. But when you think about pro audio, you generally think about people like, again, Behringer, PreSonus, whatever, right? But again, I know a lot of digital companies disrupt industries like that. So I was kind of like on board with Zoom, and this seemed pretty cool. So I was kind of excited about looking at the Zoom mixers. And when I looked at all the Zoom mixers, at the time, there was the L8, I believe, the L2... No, sorry. I think the L8 didn't exist. It was the L12, the L20, the L20R, and then later on the L8 came out. And the L8 wasn't really, again, in my view. So I was looking at the L12 and the L20. And the L12 at the time, Canadian, was somewhere around, again, I want to say $900 or something like that, the L12. And so what the L12 is kind of like this internally, but it's only 12 tracks, and it has more physical controls. It's doing the same thing as the iPad is, but it has more, but controlling it with physical controls. So as such, you actually have a way bigger mixer as the L12. Then you have the L20, which is basically the exact same thing as this, except again with physical controls. And that thing is really, really big. And so for me, when I came across the L20R, I got pretty excited for two reasons. Because one, it was as many channels as the L20, so lots of channels to play with, which was great. But two, the fact that it wasn't big. I mean, this thing is tiny. Like for a 20-channel mixer, like, look how small this is, right? Like, I have my MacBook here, and it's not that much bigger than a 13-inch MacBook Pro. And for somebody who I live in a condo, not a ton of room for a lot of stuff. It's amazing that I can just kind of tuck this away. I put it in this box, put it in the corner, and so that really attracted me. And yes, so that was one thing. The other big thing was the fact that the L20R was about the same price as the L12. So you get all the channels of the L20, but for the price of the L12. Now, granted, you have to control it through an iPad, which means you need an iPad. But luckily, I had an iPad already. So if you have an iPad already, to me, it's a no-brainer. Like for the price, why wouldn't you get the L20R? Because you get all the channels. Unless, again, you really have an aversion to controlling things digitally, right? And you really want physical faders. Don't get me wrong, there is a big advantage to it. But for the price difference, to me, like having that many more channels really made it a sweet deal. So I bought the L20R, got really excited about it. Actually, I bought it at the same time that I bought the A10 Mini to kind of beef up my live streams, which, by the way, is the reason I bought this. So with COVID, I got into doing live stream concerts, right? So I used to, kind of in my younger days, I had a high school band. I used to play in open mics, these kinds of things. With COVID, my buddy Nathan actually convinced me to do a lot of live streams. And so I started doing a lot of live streams, and my buddy Rob, who lives across the country, he started doing live streams as well. And we started upping each other's game in terms of like how good a live stream we could do. So I actually bought this to make my live streams a lot better, because before I was literally setting up a mic and just aiming it at me, and with my acoustic guitar and singing. With this, I had a piano hooked up, electric guitar, acoustic guitar, multiple microphones, all this stuff like that. So that's why I bought it, actually. So that's how I ended up with the L20R. That's why I bought it. Yeah. Okay, so what do I like about this mixer? Okay, so a lot of what I like about the Zoom L20R has to do with just generally digital mixers, right? So what I like is not really, this section is not really highlighting this versus, again, the PreSonus or the Behringer or whatever. Like it's not this versus that. This is more this versus traditional analog mixers or even digital mixers that have physical controls, right? So a lot of the stuff that I love about this is more the fact that it's just a digital mixer, digital rack mixer. So like I said, I love the flexibility. I love the fact that it's wireless control. That's great. I love the fact that it's 20 channels. 20 channels is a lot of channels, especially for a solo performer. Even like if I was playing, with my buddy Rob, and we had two acoustic guitars and electric guitars and pianos and drums, even, like, there's so much you can hook up to 20 channels. Again, 16 XLR quarter inch, but that's a lot of channels. So I love that fact. I never think about that, which is awesome. Like I said, there's great flexibility in creating the mixes. I love the independent headphone mixes. And to be honest, as somebody who's doing live streaming, I love the fact actually that the monitor mixes are headphone outputs. Again, you can change it between headphone and monitor outputs, but you can send a headphone output. And that's what I use. I use in-ear monitors, which, by the way, I've learned are basically effectively glorified headphones. But in-ear monitors, but it's basically just like a headphone, right? So it's a headphone output, and I just hook it up to the back of that. So for me, it's actually more useful that they're headphone outputs. If traditional monitor mixes output through XLR, and so if you have that, you kind of have to do something where you're converting the XLR to a headphone output. A lot of times you have headphone amps that you wear on your belt and stuff like that. Behringer has one. So the fact that I can just directly plug my headphones into the monitor mixes is really great. That's really nice. I really like what this could mean if I was in the business of mixing bands and stuff like that, because I love the fact that there's a front of house mix here, or headphone. So you can plug your headphone in here and you can listen to everybody's mix if you want. You can listen to like the bass player's mix, the drummer's mix, stuff like that. I really like that stuff. So that's really good. Like I said, the wireless control is really nice, right? The fact that, so it connects over Bluetooth, by the way. Other digital mixers use Wi-Fi. I haven't really done a range test on this, but it is really nice that when I could walk around and control it if I was mixing a band. When I'm mixing it myself, I have to say it was really nice. It's really nice to be able to, just record myself, put my headphones on, and then kind of mix from here. It's really nice to do that, actually. So the wireless mixing is good. The iPad app, I will say, is generally good. There's little bugs here and there, but nothing crazy. Like, it's nothing more than, if it kind of freezes, you just reset it, turn it back on. Like, not reset the iPad, just close the app and reopen the app, and everything's fine. So that's really, really good, actually. So I really like that. And like I said, the fact that it's a rack mixer and it's compact, that is one of my biggest selling points. Like, again, when you live in a condo, there's just not a lot of room for stuff. And so, like, especially for something that I only use once every couple months, right? It's nice that I can put it in its box, put it in the corner, and it's really not in the way. And not to mention, even when I'm doing my live streams themselves, I don't have to look for a big table somewhere where I have this mixer. I literally put it like down by the floor of the piano, and after I've set my gain and stuff like that, it's all good to go. So I do like it. How's the sound? Again, I'm not an audiophile, and I haven't been into pro audio a lot, so the sound to me is quite good. Like, I don't hear a lot of noise floor. Like it has a low noise floor, in my opinion. I don't hear a lot of hiss, like soft noise, that kind of stuff. But again, when you're doing live performances, you generally don't hear that anyways. So that sounds pretty good. I feel there's definitely enough gain on all these knobs. Now, I don't have a Shure SM7B, which is generally the ultimate test of how much gain you have. I'm plugging an SM58 into these things. I have a couple Sennheiser 83 something. Can't remember the model anymore. E83 something. So those seem to have enough gain. So I never worry about gain on this thing. And in general, I would say it sounds great. If you want a live sample, you can view any of my live streams on this channel, any of the music live streams. You'll see what this thing sounds like. So I'll let you guys judge for yourself. Now, granted, it's a combination of the quality of this thing and my ability to mix, which is questionable, to be honest. So lots to love about like about this mixer. One feature I will say that was surprising to me was the recorder. I didn't really buy this thing for the recorder. I'm not going to record my live streams, and I'm not going to record my live performances audio-wise. I mean, my live streams recorded anyways through YouTube, but I didn't think I'd use that. But once I found out that recorder can be used as a virtual sound check, that really became invaluable, actually. I shouldn't say invaluable. Yes, virtual sound check itself became invaluable. The fact that it's built into the recorder, I'll talk a little bit about that later. But it is a really, really handy thing as a solo performer. Again, the fact that I can just set up all this, set up my gain, set up my setup, and then play a couple songs, get recorded to this, and then play it back, and then mix afterwards. That is really an amazing thing. I can't overstate how handy that is to do a virtual sound check. So that is a really, really good thing. So overall, there are a lot of things I like about this, and to be honest, I'm happy with it. I'm happy that I have it. I'm happy that I have it, and I'm happy to use it for my live streams. But ultimately, there still are a couple problems that I have with this thing, which I will talk about next. Okay, so let me tell you why I have a problem with the Zoom L-20R mixer, and why my opinion of Zoom has gone down a little bit because of things that have been brought to light with the Zoom L-20R. So there's a lot of small things, and then there's kind of an overarching thing here. So let's talk about some of the small things that I have an issue with this. Okay, so the Zoom L-20R, what I find weird about it is it's a weird mix of a digital, like, iPad controlled mixer and a physical controlled mixer. So what I mean by that is there are a couple of physical controls here that you cannot access on the iPad app. So what are those? Gain, compressor, pad and high Z, phantom power, and that's it. Okay. Now, arguably, those are things that you might set at the beginning and never touch again. Okay. Gain is a good example of that. Gain is one of these things that you set per instrument, right? Like for your microphone that you have or your instrument that you're plugging in, you kind of set the gain so that it's an optimal level, and then theoretically you don't touch it after that, right? Everything else you do, mixing the faders, EQ, all that, that's all done on the iPad. So I can kind of see the argument for that, right? EQ for sure. Sorry, gain for sure. That's one thing. Secondly, compressor, kind of, right? I could see compressor. Yeah, again, it's maybe a little bit about gain, right? And I also see why they did it, because those are the things, again, that I don't believe are digitally controlled. I think those are analog pieces, right? So those are here. But I have to say, there are other mixers where all that stuff is accessible through the iPad app or whatever app, the tablet app or the web app or whatever you end up using to control these things. And so the fact that it can be done, it kind of makes it feel a little bit weird that you have to do some of this here and some of this here. Because I can imagine if I really want to use this with a wireless situation where I'm going to now go mix, or set the gain for somebody's microphone, right? Okay, so I set the gain for someone's microphone. And then later on we realize, oh, shoot, that's not really a good level. Now I have to go back on stage where this thing is hooked up and then kind of try to adjust it. Whereas for other mixers, I could control it all through the app, right? So the fact that you have this weird hybrid of some of the stuff is there and some of the stuff is on the iPad, and granted, I see a lot of cases why you wouldn't touch a lot of the stuff here on a regular basis. The fact that it could be done makes me feel a little bit like, it's too bad that it's not on this. So that's one thing. Second thing, let's talk about the compression. So this is one of those things where I actually, I talked about my buddy Rob. I tried to really sell him on this single knob compression as like, oh no, it's working. But, he's saying it doesn't seem to work that well. And, the more I looked at it, it's like, yeah, it doesn't work that great. So it's a single knob compressor, which for those who don't know, combines basically 3 or 4 controls that a compressor usually has, right? Compressor, you have the threshold at which it kicks in, the compression ratio, and then the makeup gain, right? That's all controlled through a single knob. And I have never used a single knob compressor on another mixer, but I have to say the single knob compressor on this mixer is very hard to be convinced that it's that useful. I don't know if I'm not using it right or what, but I find it very hard. I find I have to jack it up quite a bit for it to make a difference. And once I'm doing that, there's a lot of makeup gain, which makes it a little bit weird with the actual gain control itself. And so I find the single knob compressor not really that great. And when I was researching single knob compressors, what's nice about single knob compressors in other mixers, sometimes they give you the specs on it. Like what is the threshold that it's kicking in at? What is the compression ratio? These kinds of things. And I emailed Zoom about this, and I said, hey, like, what are your settings on your single node compressor? And basically got a very generic non-response. Just kind of like, this is a proprietary thing. We don't have specs on it or whatever. And I was like, okay, that's not great. So I basically just didn't know how to use a single knob compressor. I kind of like guess and fiddle with it, but it's not very useful. Sorry, I shouldn't say it's not very useful. It's just hard to drive a lot of value out of that compressor. Let's talk about another problem that I have with this, the USB interface. So yes, it is a USB interface. So what that means, right, is you can plug this to your computer and you can get audio out of it. Now, what is a shame is if you plug this up to a DAW, okay, like digital audio workstation, then yes, you can bring up all the channels, which is great, right? You can record all 16 channels. There's all 16 separate tracks. You can pick the channel, whatever, this and that. That's all great. So that's fine. And again, for most uses of a audio interface, that's what you would do, right? So that makes sense. But where I would normally plug this up to my computer is to use for my live streams. And what do I use for my live streams? I use OBS, right? So I use OBS for my live streams. And the thing about this is when you hook this up to a program that is not designed for multi-track inputs, okay, you basically get channel 1 and channel 2. That's it. Okay, so you get channel 1 as your left channel, you get channel 2 as your right channel, and you don't get anything else. And this is not the case for all programs, but for OBS on the Mac, that's what you're getting. Which makes kind of sense, okay? Like that's, again, like just default behavior. But if you think about how I want to use this, I want to plug in all my mics and everything like that into this thing. And then what I want to go to my computer is my left and right mains, right? And without downloading like plugins to set up virtual audio devices and all this stuff like that, you can't do it, right? You have to really find this workaround. So here's the crazy thing. It's not crazy, but it's the thing that I have to do, which I feel like it's so unnecessary when this is a USB audio interface, which is I plug everything into this, then I plug the mains of this thing into another audio interface. Actually, it's another Zoom audio interface, the Zoom U24. So I plug the left and right from that into my Zoom audio interface, and that goes into my computer, which goes into OBS. And that way the main is coming in for channel 1 and channel 2. So that's kind of annoying. And I wouldn't expect Zoom to automatically put the left and the right channel as the default, because that doesn't make sense either, right? Because if you're recording into an app like QuickTime, you obviously want to record channel 1 or 2 if you're just recording like a podcast or a voiceover or something like that, right? That makes sense. I'm not saying the default doesn't make sense, but at least it would be nice if you had some custom audio routing or something like that, right? Like the ability to say, okay, the left main and the right main are going to go to USB 1 and 2 or something like that, right? That would be really handy, especially in a digital mixer. That's one of the big advantages of digital mixers, right? Is to have that custom audio routing, and that's just not there. So those are some of the issues I have with this, right? And it doesn't prevent me from using it. I mean, I like using it. It's great, whatever, right? But part of me when these things come up, I'm just kind of praying, and kind of hoping that there's going to be a firmware update. There's going to be a firmware update. There's going to be a firmware update that kind of adds these cool features, because so much hardware these days, there's firmware updates, and it's great, And that's where I started to realize that, while there's a lot of things I like about Zoom, I don't get that impression that they do a lot of those kinds of things. Like when I look at Rode, for example, again, Rode, they make awesome, products, which, by the way, I've never owned a Rode product, but when I see Rode's products, the number one thing I see is just how many firmware updates they release and how amazing, like how much they change their core product after you've bought it. Like the Rodecaster Pro, their podcasting solution, like they just keep seeming to release firmware updates that make it better and better. Their wireless Go, same thing. They keep releasing things that make it better and better. Blackmagic is a great example. I own Blackmagic products, and they release things that make the cameras better and better. I bought this thing, a couple years ago, and the only firmware update it got, I don't even know what it did, to be honest. There was something small that it did, but nothing groundbreaking. And all these problems that I think about, I feel like they could be addressed by firmware updates, and it just doesn't seem like they would. And the more I thought about Zoom, the more I thought that maybe that's just the type of company that are. I mean, don't get me wrong. It could be a resourcing issue. I don't want to make assumptions as to why they don't do that. But if there are other products out there for in similar costs that do address these things, that's where you start to feel a little bit, not as great about your purchase. So don't get me wrong. I'm ultimately very happy with this product, and it does what I want it to do. But all these problems that I have with it all stem from the fact that I've seen what competitors can do. The biggest one that I look at is the Behringer XR18. Now, when I look at the Behringer XR18, okay, there are just so many things that I wish this thing had. The first one being audio routing. The Behringer XR18, I actually have the app here. Okay. The Behringer XR18, very similar app, but there is just so much more you can do here. So let's start with routing. There you go. I can put any channel I want and send it to any other track that I want, right? I can do all that stuff. I can set up the USB mapping, right? So if I want, let's say I want channels 16 and 17 to go to USB 1 and 2, I can do all that stuff, right? So that's really amazing. So Behringer XR18 audio routing, awesome. Okay. When it comes to audio processing, it is insane how much more you can do on the Behringer XR18. Okay, like if I look at a given channel and I go into the channel and I talk about what you can do. Okay, so let's talk about what you can do on the XR18 that you can't do on the Zoom. So XR18, you can adjust the gain right here. I don't have to go to the device. In fact, the device doesn't actually have any control on it. You have to do it from here. Okay. I can set it to link to a different channel if I want. I can link channel 1 and 2. I can okay, so that's the gain. I can do independent mixes just like the L20R. Look at this. Full controlled gate and compressor, right? Full control. Like it's like really fine grained control, right? You can do the ratio, the threshold, the knee, right? You can set all that. The attack even, the hold, the release. So how aggressive that compressor is. Okay. Let's look at the EQ. Again, another level, right? You can do really nice full parametric EQ. You can adjust like the Q value. So how like thin that is. You can add other points, really get fine tuned with the EQ. You can do insert effects. You can do, again, effects returns, stuff like that. You can do all that. You can create groups. You can do just so much. You can do the XR18. And now, granted, maybe they're going after a different market, right? Like maybe the L20R is not meant for the market that wants to get that fine grain and fine tuning it, right? Like maybe that much EQ control is not great. But as somebody who does want that kind of control, it kind of hurts me to think, oh man, like the XR18 can do so much than this thing can do. Now, granted, I haven't actually played with the XR18. I just played with the app, right, that controls it. But Behringer has an amazing reputation, right? So I imagine they're really good. I've heard the Wi-Fi kind of sucks to connect to it, but whatever. If I'm not that far away, that's not that big a deal. But it just seems like the XR18 just has so much. Now, granted, the XR18 is missing one thing, okay, which I have to fully admit and be fair. The recorder. This thing that I talked about that was so valuable for my virtual sound check, the recorder is not built into mixers like the XR18, right? So you don't have that. But you're not completely at a loss because you can still do a virtual sound check. It's a bit more involved. You have to have a laptop and you record into a DAW and then you play that back out. So it is definitely more involved, and which adds to the footprint and all this stuff like that. I definitely agree with that. But here's the thing. Last time I checked, right before this video, the XR18 was, I believe, $100 US less than the L20R. Less. Like, I can double check right now, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. I looked on Sweetwater, and I think this thing was like $799, and the Behringer XR18 was like $699 or something like that. And that's where it really kind of hits home, where you're just like, oh man, like for less money, I could have gotten that. Now, I don't know how much I would miss this recorder bit. Maybe I would. But it's just, when I think about what I could have had for that money, you know, the fact that I don't think there are going to be any firmware updates to this thing, you know, I think this is pretty much the way it's going to be. That's my biggest problem with the L20R. And it's a little bit my cautionary tale. If you're looking to buy a digital rack mixer, you know, don't get me wrong. If you buy this, you're not going to be sad or disappointed. Like, this is still very useful. I'm very happy that I can use this. I'm very happy that I use this with my live streams. Like, I'm not saying this is a bad product. It's just that when you compare it to something like the Behringer XR18, that's $100 US cheaper, you may be asking yourself, which one should I get, right? So those are my thoughts. Those are my thoughts on the Zoom L-20R. I didn't cover everything, but it has been a very long video. I want to thank you guys for watching. These types of videos are, I think, what I'm going to do from now on. It's just, I thought about writing scripts and doing fancy editing and all this stuff like that, and when it comes down to it, I just feel like maybe I don't have the energy, and I feel like it's just easier to set up a camera, talk about it, and hopefully you guys get some value out of it. If you have any questions at all about the Zoom L-20R, please let me know in the comments down below. Be sure to subscribe and all that stuff. And we will try to bring you more videos, more content as much as we can. Zoom L-20R, it's a pretty sweet product, but you might want to consider checking out the XR18 as well. See you guys later.